Stab to start. Stab to start. Even if Jonathan Smith's name wasn't signposted at the start of this game, this would be a pretty big giveaway. Jonathan Smith, more commonly known as Joffa, always liked to infuse his own little brand of weirdness into games wherever he could, and the phrase stab to start is probably Joffa at his most restrained. It's such an odd phrase, stab to start. I can only assume that Joffa used this particular phrasing because this game stabs its way through all 4 of its levels with such abandon that he figured, sure, why not? One more stab just to get you started. The original Green Beret was an arcade title, also known as Russian Attack. Get it? Because Russians, but it sounds like rush and if you say it fast, so you say Russian Attack and people go, did you say Russian Attack? And you say, no, Russian Attack, and they go, oh. The original title was released by Konami in arcades in 1985 and was well received, which is pretty much the only qualifying factor most arcade games needed in order to get a port to the home computers at the time. The Spectrum conversion landed at Joffa's feet, and this is often cited as one of his best games on the old rubber-keyed wonder. It's easy to see why, and it's also easy to see why Joffa was held in such high regard when it came to porting arcade titles. I owned Green Beret as a kid, though back then I had no idea it was an arcade title, nor did I have any idea that this was by the same guy who made Pud Pud. The 2 games could have not felt more dissimilar. What I did know about Green Beret is that it felt really good to play, and it was really easy to die in a very short amount of time. Stab to start might be the opening line, but stab to continue playing is definitely the tactic. Your Green Beret, who... I can't just keep calling him Green Beret. Hold on, let me check Wikipedia and see if he's got a name. No, he doesn't have a name. I'm going to call him Nigel. Nigel with a silent K. Like knife. Get it? Because of the stab. Because of the stabbing with the knife. Nigel is tasked with rescuing hostages. He's been dropped behind enemy lines, commando style, and he has to stab the entirety of Russia in order to rescue, 4 men. They're probably really good men, but seriously, the death toll here is insane. Nigel likes to travel light, so you better get used to knife info, because it's going to be your main weapon throughout. There are other armaments at hand, however, a flamethrower, a rocket launcher, and a handful of grenades. But these come with extremely limited ammo, and you lose all your ammo when you die, and you die a lot. Did I mention that this game is really, really hard? It is. It is really, really hard. Let me break down the mechanics for you a little bit. Nigel's lack of weaponry means that in order to get through this, you're going to need to get close up and personal, but not too close and personal, because if an enemy touches you, you're a life down. You start with 3 lives, and you don't get an extra life until 30,000 points, and you don't get another extra life after that until you hit 100,000 points. That may sound like an incredibly high number, but I've found that the best way to get through this game is to just not die at all. You don't need extra lives then. After a few rounds of reacclimatizing myself to this long-lost game from my history, I started to notice patterns among the enemies. There's the bog-standard Russian who just runs at you. He's got no real game plan. He probably doesn't even really mean to cause you any harm. He's just trying to get to the bus stop because there's a forecast for snow later and he doesn't want to get stuck in the military camp. Stab him. There's this guy in black uniform. He's a gunner. He's only a gunner when he really wants to be, though. He only shoots about 10% of the time and takes a good second or 2 to aim his gun at you, giving you enough time to react to the bullet that's about to turn you into a dust cloud. Thankfully, Nigel can duck and stab at the same time, so just keep your head down. This guy is also a little more nuanced than the standard Russian. This guy will follow you up ladders to consistently menace you. Again, if he touches you, you're dead, so he's a particular pain in the arse. Stab him. Then we have Karate Russian. He skips through the level with a very particular soundbite, and it's one you'll no doubt dread hearing, as it means you'll need to brace yourself if you're not currently in the clear. This Russian camply skips along the level until he's within kicking distance, at which point he'll kung fu your face off. You need to be very careful here, as you need to be able to jump and stab in order to reach him as he kicks. This is fine unless you're near a ladder, at which point you'll then grab onto the ladder instead and get kicked back to Krakow. Even without the threat of rogue ladders, jumping on the spot can often leave you open to getting attacked from the ground enemies as you're locked in position while you jump. They're pretty consistent enemies, even from the first level, so get used to them. Jump and stab him. Lastly, for now, in our collection of mainstay enemies, we have this guy. He's got a sort of cross on his face or something. I call him Power Up Man, as he drops a weapon when you kill him. This is the only guy who drops his weapon. He also doesn't use any weapons. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Regardless, you'll need to memorize the position of these guys if you want a good chance of getting through each of the levels, because the power that the weapons provide is pretty essential. Stab him, and then get shooting. If you play for any length of time, you'll start to map out a route through each level in your head, and it'll start to become second nature. The first level, for instance, had me doing the following each time. Climb to the first level, get the flamethrower, use the flamethrower to take out Mortimer the Mortar Gunner, again, not his official name. Use the flamethrower to take out the mines by the first truck, which allows you to get to the next power-up man a lot easier. Then, stockpile at least 3 shots for the final boss rush. This all sounds simple enough in theory, but every second of Green Beret is anxiety-inducing. Enemies don't spawn in a set pattern, so while you may have a path laid out in your head, the enemies you'll have to contend with on the way are not going to be the same each time, which leaves you consistently on the back foot as you try to remember which way to go while also concentrating on not getting kicked in the face by another goddamn karate Russian. Overall, I'd say it took me a solid hour to master the first level without losing a life, and bear in mind there are only 4 levels, each with increasing difficulty. This wasn't going to be easy. The second level begins to feature Parachute Pete, a machine gunner who flies through the air and blasts you with bullets. Thankfully, he always spawns in the same place, and there's a good vantage point you can get to in order to bazooka that fat bastard right out of the sky. A couple hours later, and I was reaching level 3, the first section of which took me at least another couple of hours to master, and even then, I only managed to get past it a few times. The issue with this level is that it is full of Mortimer the Mortar Gunners, and the special weapon the Power-Up Man drops is the least useful one to use, the grenade. While the rocket launcher and flamethrower move forward in a straight line and mow down everything in their path, the grenade is thrown in an arc and explodes, killing enemies in a radius. It's not half as useful, and coupled with the increased difficulty, it made getting through this area an absolute nightmare. At the end of this level, which I only reached once, you get to fight 3 men in what look to be cyclecopters? What sort of self-respecting army sends in these 3 dickheads to fight off a man who stabbed his way through your entire ranks? Anyway, if it wasn't for the fact I picked up a bazooka beforehand, I have literally no idea how I would have killed these guys. As it was, they weren't too difficult to take out. The 4th level doesn't particularly spike in difficulty. I think the consistent threat of death so far into the game is the main thing that plays on your mind. Sure, there are more Mortimers and more Parachute Petes, but all in all, if you can get past level 2 and 3, then level 4 is fairly similar. I wonder what the boss is like though. Oh. Yes, your final showdown is with a coterie of flamethrower-wielding arseholes, and you've basically got to just time your jumps to get from left to right in order to stab them all in succession. When you beat them, you're back to level 1. There's no real ending to Green Beret, you just see how far you can get before anxiety bursts your heart in twain. It's a game that sees you pushing for a high score, or your furthest distance. It's not designed to be swallowed whole and eaten in one big bite. It's designed to punish you, to make you get better, to ensure you get your money's worth out of something that's essentially over in less than 20 minutes. And it worked. I wasn't just playing this game because I needed to do it in order to get a review done and dusted. I was playing this game because the punishment, for the most part, was fun. Sure, there's a level of frustration there. There can be points where the random enemy spawns lead to a situation that it's practically impossible to escape. But the feeling of getting better, the feeling of improving, of getting further along than you had previously, when a game succeeds at making that part feel good, you know it's hit it out of the park. So yeah, that was Green Beret, and looking at the arcade original, which I played through just after playing the Spectrum version, it's actually slightly easier. I think the biggest difference is the karate enemies aren't half as prolific in the arcade version as they are in the Spectrum version. In the Spectrum version, they are constantly everywhere. In the arcade version, from what I played, I only ever came across them a few times. And the biggest difference there, especially with the arcade version, is obviously there's a lot more colour involved, but the enemies are easier to tell the difference. So with the karate enemies, they don't skip. They just run at you like the other enemies, but they're a distinct colour. Now, that wouldn't work in the Spectrum version, because obviously the colour clash and everything else. So Joffa invented the camp skipping motion that they do beforehand, and the sound that plays as they're doing that. In the arcade version, I couldn't get used to the enemies not making that noise. So every goddamn time one of those karate enemies came along, that was me done. The other big difference I've noticed that makes the arcade version slightly easier is that you have checkpoints in the arcade version. That is to say, when you die, you start at a specific point a little further back, whereas in Joffa's version, when you die, that's it. You die and you come back in exactly the same place, which Joffa's version sounds fairer, but it means that the special weapons that the enemies drop, you can't get them again. Whereas in the arcade version, you can basically follow the path back to where the special enemies were, get your weapon again, and carry on. In Joffa's version, you're screwed basically. If you die, you've just got to carry on from that point. Outside of that, though, when you compare the two side by side, which I'll do on the screen here, yeah, you can really see how well he has managed to convert this into a machine nowhere near as powerful as the arcade version. So, I mean, what more can you say? It's a classic for a reason, and there's nothing further I can say on the matter, really. It's still enjoyable to this day. I still had a lot of fun trying to get further into the game, and yeah, stab to finish.